Hello. So today I'm going to be running you through Introduction to After Effects, exactly how to use the software on a basic level, where things are, and how to really get started. So just to begin, this is what After Effects looks like. This might look ever so slightly different because this is the updated software, but you'll be looking at something very, very similar. This pane over here is one that you'll use a lot. So this is the bin. So this is where you will put any of your assets like videos, audio, um, anything that you're really using in your project. Over here, down bottom, you'll end up with a timeline, which we'll go into in a moment. And in the middle, you'll be able to see your footage in edit. So I'm going to start off by showing you how to import files. So in this section here, what I tend to do on a mouse is I right click, import file, and then depending on what I'm importing, for example, this is a screencast test I did earlier, I just press open and you'll see it's imported here as a video, so I could use that. What I like to do with projects, and I would suggest you did the same, is when you start, name folders in this section. So if you go left, right click on a mouse, new folder, and then put film clips, for instance, and then you could also have new folder compositions. That helps you to be able to find things more easily. So each and every video that you're editing in this is referred to as a composition, but we'll get into that in a moment. So first thing first, how to create a new composition. So there are a number of different ways to do this, but the easiest way is to go over to composition, new composition, and you'll find that there's a whole bunch of different settings here. So for our project, we're going to be doing 800 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. You'll need square pixels with a frame rate of 25 frames per second. And similar to the phonotrope exercise that you did recently, you used 33 frames in your circle. For this, in order to be able to do 33 frames, we need a duration of 1 minute and 9 seconds. That's because there is 25 frames in a second plus the extra 0.9. So I'll click OK. We want a white background as well, so make sure you click OK. And there we have it. So this is your composition to start with. So just to check that you've done it right, you'll notice here this is a time code. So if I pull this bar across, you'll notice it's at 0.13, and if you scrub it up to 24 and at 25, you'll notice it says 1. So that means you're at 1 second, and then each one after is 1 second and a frame. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in total, you'll have 33 frames to work with, which is what we need. So perfect. So in terms of making your animation, we're going to do a few different things, but to start off with, we're going to be drawing some shapes and some vectors, and for now we're going to be drawing a polystar. So to do that, you need to go up here and you want to click Layer, New Shape Layer, and then when you're on that, you'll notice that a new shape layer has appeared down here. So to rename the layer, you can either double click it, or actually that's not worked. You can click it and press the enter key and it will allow you to rename it, or you can right click it on a mouse, scroll down to the bottom and put rename. And for this, I'm going to rename it as Polystar. In After Effects, you'll find that across all of your different layers, you'll want really clear labeling. So try and do that each and every time you do it. So whilst I'm on Polystar, I will go up to here, click this shape button here, and you'll notice there's a few different options. So I'm going to go here with polygon, and with the left button click down on the mouse, I'll drag out a shape like this. If I want to move that shape, I'll use this button here, drag it over to the middle. So nice and simple. So what we want to do at first, you'll notice that there's a line around the edge, and this is referred to as the stroke, and in the middle is the fill. For this we need no stroke at all, so you click the stroke button and this button here with a red slash across, and that will get rid of the stroke around the edges. And then for fill, I'm going to choose a random color, so for this a pink will do. Okay, there we go. So that's that. So with my Polystar selected down here in the timeline, if you click this little arrow, you'll do this quite often. So if you click this and then click transform, under here are all the different properties that you can transform. So for instance, if you're wanting to rotate this shape, or if you're wanting to move its position, you can do that quite easily. So what we're going to do to animate first is we're going to be using things called keyframes. So if you imagine a keyframe as something that records data, so records where something was in any one time. So here I'm at the start of my timeline, and I'm going to click this little stopwatch arrow, and you'll notice it has created a little diamond here. So this is a keyframe, and this is recording that this is the rotation position. What I'll then do is, because we're creating a looping animation, I'll go all the way to the end, and if you want to get exactly to the end, if you hold down shift, it will snap to the end. And then what I'll do, I'll hover over this, and then I'll use Command C and then Command V, and you'll notice it's copied it here again. So this means the same value. It started at the start, will end at the end. So in the middle, if I go into the middle and I change the rotation value, you'll notice that it's turning, so that's good, and it's now created a new keyframe. So if we play this back using the space bar, you click that, you'll notice it's moved and then come back to its original shape. And with the playback on After Effects, it will always play back the work area, which is indicated by these blue bars. So just to show you that. So yeah, so if you're working on only a part of your animation, you could move this bar back and forth, and it will play back only that section. So anyway, I'm going to put that back to normal, and then we can keep editing. Okay, so that is the rotate. Okay, so now we're going to try and change the scale of this polygon. So what we'll do is, I'm going to move this marker to the start of the timeline. I'm going to click the stopwatch on scale. I'm going to go all the way to the end, and I'm going to copy and paste. So I want that scale diamond, which is attached to here. I'll Command C and Command V, and that means the scale property is exactly the same over there. So now if I go into the middle, or say for instance slightly further on in the timeline, I'll change the scale down, and it will create another keyframe. So this means now it starts in one place, gets smaller, spins and goes back out again. So earlier on when I was saying about keyframes are recording data, it's recording that it's this scale and this rotation earlier on, and later down the line it's going back to the exact same position, and we can edit anything in between. And for looping animations, it's important that you copy and paste the keyframes from the start to the end each and every time you do this. Okay, and finally, after scaling, I'm going to do something with opacity. So this is the transparency of it. So I'm going to click the stopwatch here. It's created another keyframe. I'm going to select that, Command C, go to the end of my timeline, Command V, and then in the middle, I'm going to go dead center this time. I'm going to bring the opacity right down low. And it's created another keyframe. So now you'll notice we'll have it animating in scale, rotation, and also opacity. Okay, great. It's looking good. Okay, so next on the agenda, we're going to do some stylizing and adding some effects. So to do that, you will select the layer that you're working on. So we're still only using the one called Polystar. I've got to Effects. And for this, we're going to use Stylize Roughen Edges. So if you go into Stylize, Roughen Edges, you'll notice in this window that was our bin, so this is a project bin, there's a new tab called Effects Controls. This is where it lives, and whenever you're on a layer that has an effect assigned to it, it will appear here. So for roughen edges, we're going to be using just the scale and border selections. So if at any point you want to see all of the keyframes associated with your layer, you click your layer and then just the letter U on your keyboard, and you'll notice it shows everything that's already assigned to it. So now what I'm going to do at the start of the time, I'm going to click border. So I want the border to start on 8, and if I click Polystar and then press U now, you'll notice there's another keyframe. This is because this is where the animation for that effect exists. The other way of finding that is if you open it up like this, you'll notice that next to the transform properties, there is also an effects one now, and it lives there as well. But the easiest way is to completely close everything and use U to show all the things that are animating only. So now with border, I'm going to copy that keyframe, to bring it over to this side and copy it again. And in the middle, I want that border to be really thick and really obvious. So I'm going to raise that up to 25, for instance. So you'll notice that there is roughening occurring here already. And if I scrub backwards, you'll notice that that rough edge is animating from nothing at the start through to rough and out again back to nice and smooth. And that's because we'd copied that initial keyframe from the start to the end. So that's how to animate the border. So now this time I want to animate the scale of the rough edge. So I'll go to the start, I'll click scale, click U again so I can see that new keyframe, which you'll notice is roughen edges scale here. So I'll copy that with Command C, go to the end, Command V, and in the middle anywhere now I'm going to, so here I'm going to do it, I'm going to change the scale up to 183. So you'll notice it will change the amount of fragments on the edge. So actually for this case I'm going to go down to 25. So that's created a new keyframe, which is great. So I'll go back to the start, smooth, it's roughening an edge and the edge is getting smaller and smaller, and then that should go back to normal on the way out. Perfect. Okay, so because you'll notice that there's a lot now going on in the scene, I like to, when I'm doing something new, always close the layer by pressing U. Okay, so we've done that. So next, the next effect we're going to do is we're going to change the color on this Polystar. So if we click on Polystar, go Effect, and now we're going over to Color Correction, and we're going to be using Hue Saturation. So where is Hue Saturation? Here. Okay, great. So you'll notice that the effect roughen edges is up the top. I'm going to close that so I don't need to look at it. And then hue and saturation. So going back to Polystar, I'm going to open my keyframes by pressing U. And then with hue and saturation, we're going to first click this colorize click box. You'll need to do that. And then we're going to use these parameters, so hue and saturation, to see what we can make. So at the start, I'm going to have my marker at the very beginning. I'm going to press colorize hue, and then I'm going to find where that keyframe is by pressing U, and you'll notice that it's colorize hue is there. So I'll copy and paste that right to the end, and then in the middle I'm going to change the value of this by dragging this up and down. So actually we're not getting much there because we're in a position where it's quite light in color anyway. So you'll notice here that I'm changing that. So, and it's created a new keyframe, which is great. So from the start, it will be this kind of off pink. It will change into a green, and then it should come back to being off pink again, which is great. Okay, so we've edited the hue. So we're going to do colorize saturation this time. So stopwatch again at the start. I just need to find where that keyframe is. So yeah, so you'll notice that colorize saturation has now appeared. I'll copy and paste that keyframe over to the end. And somewhere in the middle, I'm going to change it, so towards the end actually, this one. And then I'll just raise that, and then I'm going to give it a bright orangish color. So now that that's created a keyframe, you'll notice that saturation and hue are now animating really nicely. Okay, so what we're going to now do, we're going to close this layer and we're going to create a brand new one. So to do that, I want to create a new layer that is very similar to this. So I'm going to select this, I'm going to Command C and then Command V, and then you'll notice it's created a complete copy called Polystar 2. I'm going to rename this to Dots, and then because with this new layer it will have copied the shape and all of the effects underneath it, what I need to do is press U to show all of those keyframes, and I'm going to use my mouse to select all of the keyframes for dots, and I'm going to delete them. So that means that this layer will not be animated. So to make sure that I'm focusing just on the dots layer, I'm going to hide the Polystar layer, so you'll notice that there is an eye shape here, so I'm going to click that, and then that's going to hide it. So going back to dots, what we're going to do is try a few different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into dots, into the transform, and into contents, because I want to have a look at the fill and the stroke color. So if I go content, Polystar, stroke, and fill. In fill, I want to bring the opacity right down to 0. Oh, another thing we should say whilst I'm here is there's still effects on this, so I'm going to select hue and saturation and roughen edges and delete them as well. Okay, so going back to fill and stroke, we've just brought the fill down to 0. What I want to do is increase the stroke width and choose a color for it. So if I go up to stroke width, I'm going to bring that up to say 49. I'm going to pick a color first actually, so I'm going to pick a blue color for the stroke. Oh, hold on. So okay, one moment. Ah, I see. So in here, you'll notice that I've accidentally clicked off the eye icon, so it wasn't visible. So going back to this, I'm going to change the color of the stroke to nice blue. Great, and that's a bit thick, so I'm going to bring that down to 12. That looks great. So what we want for the sake of this tutorial is we want to use dashed lines. So I'm going to go here to dashes. If it lets me, no, I'm going to press the plus button to add dashes. And then here you'll be able to edit how many dashes. So I'm going to use a slightly longer dash, a 45. That looks fine to me. Okay, so to animate the dashes as if they're moving around, you'll use this offset value. So if I pull this left and right, you'll notice that it's moving. So if I go to the start of my animation, I'm going to click the stopwatch to create a keyframe. I'm going to copy that keyframe, Command C and then Command V, and then in the middle I'm going to create a new value for it to animate around. So I'm going to go to 135. So now if I play it back, you'll notice that it's animating back and forth, which is great. Okay, so now that we've got the dots layer working and animating as we want it, we want to be able to show the other layer. So I'm going to click the eye icon and you'll notice that I can see the polygon at the start. But with our first polygon, we animated its shape and rotation, so it is out of sync. But that does look cool, so I'm happy with that. What you can also do with the dots layer, you can parent that to the polystar layer so that it follows its movement. So now if I go to parent polystar, you'll see that it's now it's seeing that as a parent, and now if I drag this, it's following its movements exactly. The other way to do that is this little spiral icon is a pick whip. You click it and drag it to the layer that you want it to follow. So this one is polystar, and that will do the exact same thing. So for this demo, we're going to have it parented. Okay, great. So moving on. What we're going to do now is we're going to play around with type, so or drawing with a pen tool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to layer and create new shape layer, and I'm going to rename it to drawing. Okay, so on drawing, we're going to use a pen tool to draw paths. So up here you'll see a pen tool. Click that, and then drag it over to your canvas, and then just start clicking where you want the lines to appear. So for me, I'm going to do a bit of a zigzag, but similar to other illustration tools, you can click and drag and you'll get a bit more of a curved line, like a bit with these Bezier handles. Okay, so I want to make sure that this doesn't have a fill and is only with a stroke. So if I go over to stroke, I'm going to pick a color red from my stroke. This will do. And then I'm going to get rid of the fill completely because I just want the line. Okay, great. So now this this line, if I'm wanting to ever change it at all, I can zoom in on it using this magnifying glass. And if I click back onto make sure I'm on the drawing layer, click the pen tool, and then I should be able to pick some of the points out. So I'll just do that. So you'll see these little dots. If I click that, you'll notice it's highlighted, and I can move it around and change the way that its shape is. So that's how you edit it. Okay, so I want the roughen edge effect that we used earlier on the polystar, I want to apply to this drawing. So if I go over to drawing, go effects, stylize, and roughen edges, you'll notice that there's now a rough edge, but that's maybe a bit severe. So what I'll do, I'll bring that border down so that it's maybe around 5, 6. So whatever suits your illustration and animation style, this is one way to do it. Okay, so I've done that. I've added a rough effect. What I now want to do is actually what I need to do is make sure I can see my timeline, because this is so if you just trying to find how to resize this part. So sometimes if you want the workspace to be as it is in default, I go over to Window, Workspace, and then go to Standard, and it should reset or reset standard. There we go, that's a bit better. Okay, I can see things a bit better. Okay, so now what I need to do is I want to animate this drawing as if it's drawing on. So if I go over to drawing and click our drawing layer and click down, on our contents I want to click this little add button, and that's going to add an animation effect, and I'm going to use the trim pass effect. And down here you'll notice it's added trim pass, so if I click that down you'll notice there's a start and end option. So if I pull back this end, you'll notice that the line is working slowly by percentage to the end. So 100% is fully at the end and 0 is at the beginning. So what I'll do is I'm going to bring it down to 0, click the stopwatch so there's a keyframe. I'm going to select it and copy it, bring it to the end, and then paste it. And then in the middle, somewhere, anywhere at random, I'm going to bring that all the way up to 100%. And what you'll find is that this will animate up to 100% and back down to 0, up and down. And because we've been copy and pasting our frames from start to end, we're getting a perfect loop. So that's working out quite well. Okay, if you want your whole composition to fit in this window, because you'll find sometimes it starts to move around, I'd click this little arrow here and put fit, and then it will bring it straight into the middle again. So that's great. Okay, so now, for us to be able to use our animation back on the Phonotropes that you were designing last week, we need to export this. So ahead of starting an After Effects project, I would make a new folder. I'd call it my After Effects project or whatever you want to call it. And in there, I would create a new folder called exports. And this refers to all of your videos that you've created once in After Effects. I then create another file called After Effects file. And it just means that you can make things super clean and easy to find. So in After Effects, I'm going to go File, Save. I'm going to find my folder on the desktop, and then I'm going to put that in the After Effects file, and I'm going to call it My First Animation. Okay, and that's where that'll live. So now to export this, we're going to export it as a series of JPEGs, so that you can access them as separate images, and there will be 33 of them now. So now to export it, we'll go over to Composition, Add to Render Queue, and in Render Queue, to change the settings, there's a few buttons here, but for now we're going to be clicking this one. And what we want to do is we want to go over to Format Options, and we want it to be H.264. Actually, no, scrap that. What we need to do, because I'm talking about how to export it as a video, but because we're doing photos, you want to go over to Format, and then you want to go to JPEG Sequence. And that's great. So JPEG Sequence, and then output to, this is where it's going to save it to, that exports file that we made earlier. We'll find that, exports. You notice here it's got a load of hashes, and this means that it's going to start naming each one 001, 002 for each frame. So I'm going to call this a polygon animation, for instance. And I'm going to save it. And so now it knows that it's going to save it as a JPEG sequence, and it's going to save it like this. So I'm going to click render, and you'll notice that it's rendering for each of the frames. So now you'll hear a beep at the end of rendering as well. So that just confirms that it's finished. So if I go over to my folder, I'm going to go my first animation project, and in exports where we're saving it, you'll notice now that there will be 33 files in total. And each one of these is each section of your animation. And this is what we're going to be using later today in Photoshop. So we're going to be bringing that into Photoshop, and I'll make a new video for how to import it into Photoshop in a moment. Okay, so thank you, and yeah, I'll see you in a moment.